All right, guys, we've got all our packages opened and we got all our bolts laid out so that we know what's what. We'll give you some pictures of those so you got a rough idea what all that looks like. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the end caps off of our Y pipes. These are just slid on there. And we're going to get these installed on the ends of the actual exhaust. While we're doing this, note we need the exhaust hanger mounts mounted on there as well. You need them on the front of where it says Trinity Racing, and you're going to need one on the top and one on the very bottom. I'll show you what I mean. So this is going to be our top exhaust when they're stacked. So for this guy, we're actually not going to do that first. We're going to get these bolts started. So line these bolts up. We've already got our lock washers installed on there. And let's just get a couple of these started. All right, we've got our 3 bolts installed, but we did not install the bolt at the top of the Trinity Racing sign. So we're gonna go ahead and get that installed now. We're gonna put our hanger on there. And we're gonna snug all these up. We're gonna go ahead and leave this one a little loose so that we can align it with our hanger after we get it mounted. So this is gonna sit on top. So our hanger's on top. And this one is gonna sit on bottom. So our hanger's gonna be on the bottom on this one. All right, now that we've got our ends mounted, we're going to actually mount everything into the clamps. Obviously, first thing we have to do is disassemble these guys. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna lay our brackets out. We want the brackets back 1.25 inches from the tip of the exhaust. So we got our tape measure, and we're gonna measure from the edge of this crack to the edge of our mount, and we're right at about 1.25 inches. So once you've got that measured out and you're 1.25 inches, we can go ahead and install our top clamp. We'll use the 2 existing screws that were there. Just want to get this started. And then we're going to use one of our big bolts, and that goes in the center. Got a long way to go there, so we'll go ahead and impact him in a little bit. Note, we're not torquing this down. This is all loosely tightened. Then we're going to line up our second clamp, matching that up with our bracket in the back to make sure we've got equal spacing there. And if you want, you can measure this out. Make sure that it measures the same. About 5 3/4. All right, 5 3/4. Note, there are 4 bolts that look almost the same. However, 2 of them are slightly longer. So you want to make sure that you use the shorter ones in the brackets and the longer ones on your 1-inch extensions. So make sure you compare those and use the long ones in here. So as you can see, we installed them backwards. So we're just going to pull these bolts out and switch our hangers to the outsides. All right. So now that you've got that mounted, the whole exhaust is actually together. You get an idea what that looks like. So the next thing we need to do is we need to mount our hanger bracket to our exhaust brackets. To do that, we're going to use our 1-inch spacers. So you've got 2 bolts. So this is probably a little easier if you've got someone to help you, but for demonstration purposes, so y'all can see what we're doing, we're gonna do it kind of upside down. Put your lock washer on your bolt, run it up through the front. All right, we got it mounted. We gotta tighten it up. You can leave this a little loose so that after you've got it hung, you can kind of straighten everything out. Once everything's kind of mocked up, then we'll tighten down all the bolts permanently and make sure nothing goes anywhere, but that way everything lines up real nice. All right, now that we've got this put together, let's go install it on our RZR. All right, now that we have our exhaust all pre-assembled, we're gonna start to disassemble the RZR. First thing we're gonna do is just pull the bed out, super simple. We're gonna pull the 4 bolts on top. And this guy just lifts up and slides out. Next, we're gonna pull our rear fascia off by pulling off these 2 T50 bolts. So to get this guy off, there's a little tab that goes down in the bottom. You're just gonna lift up on it and pull him out. Now that we've got our exhaust exposed, we're going to loosen up our flange bolts that connect the header to the exhaust pipe. These are a 14 millimeter. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna pull our bracket off the bottom here. These are gonna be a 12 millimeter. Now that you've got the bottom hanger off, the only thing left holding this on is your 2 top hangers. So we should be able to slide it sideways and get it loose. And then once it's out, we're gonna wiggle this out like this. Watch this hanger up here because it's going to try to catch on the cage. All right, now that we've got our exhaust completely out, we're going to shift the camera angle over to the side and we're going to work on pulling our header off. Next, what we need to do is we're going to remove this heat shield. There are 10 millimeter bolts on each side. There's a total of 4 of them. So now that we have our heat shield off, we're going to start to remove the actual headers. So we're going to loosen these all by hand so that we don't strip any of these out and just work one to the next. There are 9 of these. 1 down here. So we're going to use a 6 millimeter Allen head. So there are 4 bolts, 1 here, 1 down there, and the 1 back here that are pretty tricky to get to. So we had to use just a regular Allen key with a little breaker bar, and we backed those all out first, and the rest of them will be a little easier because we can get those with a socket. What we didn't want is we didn't want the hard ones to be left to last, and we're trying to support the weight of the header and trying to back those out. So we took the hardest ones out first, and now we'll slowly take them out. I'll take the rest of the bolts out in hardest to easiest pattern. These are all broken loose, but we're just gonna go ahead and take them out by hand. And we're gonna leave this bolt here for last and the one on the other side for last because those are gonna be the bolts that are actually holding up the weight of our header. Also note that there are little lock washers on here, so don't drop these and lose those. Be careful when removing those bolts that you don't drop them. Okay, we've got all but this bolt and this bolt out. And before we remove those, we need to make sure that we disconnect our O2 sensor. So there's just a clip up here. You can just pop that right off. Pull that cord down, and now that whole O2 sensor will come out with your header. So my lovely assistant is going to hold the weight of the header as we remove these last two bolts. It's not too bad having a hot assistant when you're working out here, is it? Let's just slide right out. So we are going to reuse our old gasket. We got lucky and the gasket stayed on, so we're just going to leave that there. If it does come off, we're going to need to very carefully remove it from the header so that we can install it with the new exhaust. So you'll notice that the new Trinity header has got slots in the bottom so that you can put those two bolts in, slide it down, and hold the weight of that before you install the rest of the bolts. So we're going to install these two bolts back in before we install the header. So our new header is going to slide on the other side of that frame there. And we're just going to slip it down one of the two bolts that we already have installed. Be careful not to install these bolts too far in. We're going to go ahead and reinstall our bolts. Once you have all your bolts tightened down by hand, they need to be torqued to 18 foot-pounds each. So get your little torque wrench, get in there and get them torqued down nice. We torqued all of our bolts down by hand, and then we torqued them to 18 foot-pounds each. Last thing we need to do on our header is remove our O2 sensor. This is a 7/8 wrench. Just gonna pop this guy off. Once you break it loose, it's pretty easy. Just unscrew it. And we're just gonna reinstall our O2 sensor back on our new header. Torque this guy down. All right. He gets plugged back in up top. Make sure you got that good and clipped together. There's no issues there. Now that we've got our header installed, we are ready to install the exhaust. So the first thing we have to do is we need to get our donut gasket off of our old header and put it onto our new header. So we've already got our O2 sensor off. Now we need to pull the donut gasket off of here, and we're just gonna slide it on here. So this thing just twists off. I take a little finesse. Easy as that. And we're just gonna slide this on here. You're gonna twist that in as far as you can get it. just like that. We're gonna go ahead and install our actual exhaust. Do note that none of these clamps are actually bolted down. Everything's just kind of mocked up. Everything moves pretty easily. This is gonna allow us to align everything in the machine easier, and then we'll tighten this all down after everything's bolted together. So to get this slid in, all we need to do is tilt it forward like this. Slide it in sideways. And reach around and grab the edge of the exhaust. This clamp at the top makes things a little difficult, but go slow and it'll slide right in. Then once you have it in, you're just going to use that top hanger to hang on the existing OEM hangers. Now we need to line up the donut gasket with the flange and get that bolted together. So we'll kind of get that lined up, and then we'll slide those hangers in a little further, bring that exhaust over. Once we have that about right, we're going to install our 14mm OEM exhaust bolts on the new flange. All right, so we're going to install our bolts. Just go ahead and get them started one at a time. Once you got one started, move on to the next. Don't worry about tightening it down. So we got both of these bolts started. Not the easiest thing to do. You got to use a little muscle. But once you have that done, we want to align the Y pipe with the flange so that it's all as even as possible. And then we're going to start to torque it down a little bit. Go evenly so that you get a good seal. All right. So now that we've got our flange tight, we're going to go ahead and make sure all of our exhaust is lined up properly. Make sure we've got even space between these guys. All this is still loose. Now we're going to go ahead and install our springs. Hook those little guys in and stretch them out over our exhaust. Going to keep everything nice and tight. And then we want to tighten up these bolts and these bolts. The last thing we need to do is tighten our brackets on the hangers. We're going to use a 13mm on the back and your hex head. Now that we have everything bolted on, aligned, all our springs are tight, all of our bolts are tight, all of our hanger bolts are tight, we have our O2 sensor plugged in, everything is done as far as installing the exhaust. The next thing we need to do is install our fascia. This is going to mount right here like this. And you're going to use the OEM Torx head bolts that were mounted here. And then you're going to use the small bolts with the small spacers to go in between here to take up this space and mount to the back. So we're going to take the small washer and our long bolt, and we're going to slide that through there, and we're going to put the spacer on the back. The spacer is going to go in between the plastic, and then there's the washer that's going to go on the back side of the plastic, and then your nut to hold it on. All right, these are a size 4 Allen head and then a 10mm nut on the back. Those don't need to be super tight. Now that we've got the top 2 tight, we're just gonna finish up tightening the bottom ones and we're all done. We've got our Trinity Racing exhaust installed and ready to go. We're almost ready to fire it up. The next thing we need to do before we do so is we need to take some brake cleaner and just wipe this whole exhaust down. It's all stainless, so if you have fingerprints or greasy spots on it and you fire it up, it may permanently burn into the exhaust. So we want to prevent that. We're going to wipe it all down real quick and we'll be right back and fire it up for you. The last thing that you can choose to do is install the spark arresters. We're opting out of installing them. However, if your park requires you to have them in or you just want to install them, it's super easy to do. All you do is remove the end caps down here and there's little notches where those humps will fit into. They just slide into place and then you rebolt that back on there to hold them on there. One caution I would give you is if you are going to install them, I would start the exhaust and run it first so that any extra packing that's in there can blow out and that way it doesn't clog those filters. We're gonna get our exhaust wiped down and let's go fire it up.